Everyone you have ever loved may have been assembled inside your own head. Every street you have walked, every stranger who glanced your way, every voice you remember with such tenderness, all of it could be nothing more than a quiet performance staged by a single mind. Your mind. And that mind may be the only thing in all of existence that is actually real. It is a strange thought to carry into the night, but it has followed thinking people for thousands of years, patient and unresolved. Philosophers have called it by different names. Scientists have brushed against it from unexpected directions, and most of us, at some hour we do not like to remember, have felt its cold breath for just a moment before turning away. Tonight, we are not turning away. Hello and welcome. If you find comfort in quiet ideas explored slowly, you might consider staying a while, and perhaps subscribing so these late-night journeys can find you again. What lies ahead is not a proof and not a scare. It is a long, gentle walk through one of the oldest suspicions the human mind has ever whispered to itself, that the world outside your window might be, in some strange sense, a continuation of the world inside your skull. We will move softly through perception, through old philosophy, through the odd corners of modern physics, and through the architecture of memory and self. Nothing here will be rushed. Nothing will demand belief, only a slow drift into wonder, and eventually into rest. Let the thoughts settle, and let the night begin. Close your eyes for a moment, even while you listen. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding it. Notice the soft darkness behind your lids. That darkness, strangely enough, is closer to the truth of your situation than the bright world you usually see, because your brain has never actually seen anything. Not once. Not in your entire life. It sits in complete darkness inside the bony chamber of your skull, suspended in fluid, never touched by a single ray of light. Everything you have ever called seeing is something else entirely. Light enters the eye, strikes the back of the retina, and is immediately translated into small pulses of electricity. Those pulses travel along the optic nerve, and somewhere deep in the folds of the brain, they are arranged, interpreted, and stitched together into the experience of a visible world. So the world you see is not the world outside. It is a rendering, a quiet, continuous act of translation, performed so smoothly that it feels like looking through a window, when in truth there is no window at all. Neuroscientists sometimes describe the brain as a prediction engine. Rather than waiting passively for signals, it is constantly guessing what the next moment will look like, sound like, feel like, then comparing those guesses against the incoming nerve pulses and adjusting. What you experience as reality is, in a sense, the guess that won. This is a small thought, but if you let it in, it opens a very large door, because if the brain never touches the outside world directly, then what you call your room, your bed, the shape of your own hand, all of it arrives to you only as interpretation. A private theatre, lit by no actual light, with an audience of one. Many have described this as being trapped. It is gentler, perhaps, to think of it as being the author. Your experience is not a recording of reality. It is a construction, a careful, lifelong performance your brain puts on for you, in a language only you can understand. And here is where the evening's quiet suspicion first begins to glow. If the brain is capable of building such a seamless, detailed, emotionally convincing world entirely from electrical signals, what exactly is stopping it from building the whole thing? The tree outside, the person beside you, the stars above? Each of these arrives to you through the same hidden process. Each is a pattern of neural activity you interpret as solid, out there, separate from yourself. We tend to assume there must be something real behind every pattern. And maybe there is. Probably there is. But strictly speaking, you have never stepped outside your own head to check. This is not a claim. It is just a quiet observation. The theatre is always on. The lights never come up, and the stage hands, the props, the actors, the weather, the stars, every element of the scene passes first through the same small dark room inside your skull before becoming real to you. Some have wondered whether anything truly crosses that threshold from the outside at all. Others find peace in simply noticing that the rendering is beautiful, even if its source is uncertain. Tonight, we are not trying to decide, only to feel, gently, how strange it is that the world begins inside. Think for a moment of the color red, a ripe tomato, a traffic light, the inside of a flower. It feels like one of the most obvious facts of the world, that red is out there, that it sits on surfaces, waiting to be seen. But red does not exist in the world. Not really. What exists out there are waves of electromagnetic radiation, streams of invisible energy rippling through space at different lengths. The wave you call red is roughly 700 nanometers from crest to crest. That is a number, a physical measurement. It carries no color of its own. In the silent language of physics, it is only a length. The redness, the glow, the warmth, the feeling of red happens inside you. 3 types of light-sensitive cells in your retina respond to different ranges of those waves. The signals they send travel inward and are assembled by your brain into something the physical world never contained. The experience of color is added, not received. And here is where the mystery softens into something strange. If red is something your brain makes, then there is no way to check whether your red is the same as anyone else's. When you and another person stand before the same tomato, you both agree it is red. You both learned the word from the same fruit. But what each of you privately sees, the inner quality, the felt tone of that color, is sealed inside your own skull, and no instrument ever built can reach across and compare. Philosophers have a name for these private inequalities. They call them qualia, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the particular taste of a strawberry as it meets your tongue. These are the textures of experience itself, and so far no scientist has been able to measure them from the outside. We can measure which cells fire, which brain regions light up, which chemicals rise and fall, but the inner feeling, the quality of being inside that moment, remains invisible to every outside observer. This is a quiet fact that, once noticed, tends to stay with you, because it means that every person walking past you on the street is carrying their own private spectrum of color, sound, flavor, feeling, a universe of experiences that no one else will ever directly enter. Your best friend, your closest companion, even after decades together, has never once shared a single instant of your inner view. Some have wondered what this implies about the outer world at all. If the richest parts of experience live only inside minds, then the tomato, the traffic light, and the flower are, in a sense, half-made. Their colors are born only where consciousness meets them, and this leads gently toward a stranger possibility. If the glow of color requires a mind, and every mind's glow is private, then each of us is living inside a world that, in some subtle way, only we can inhabit. The shared world begins to feel less like one room we all stand in, and more like countless overlapping rooms that merely resemble each other. You have always been inside your own. You always will be. And the walls of that room are painted in colors only you have ever seen. There is a small secret about time that your brain has spent your entire life hiding from you. You are never living in the present moment. Not exactly. By the time anything reaches your awareness, the sound of a voice, the touch of a hand, the shape of a face, it is already in the past, a small, invisible past. A fraction of a second, perhaps, but a past nonetheless. Light hits your retina, sound enters the ear, sensation travels along the skin. Each signal must then journey through a network of nerves, converted and reconverted, passed from region to region, until finally something in the brain assembles it into the conscious experience of now. That whole process takes time, short but real, usually somewhere between 1/10 and 1/2 of a second, depending on the sense and the stimulus. So the now you feel you are living in was, in truth, already gone before you met it. If this were the whole story, life would feel like watching a slightly delayed broadcast. But the brain performs a quiet trick to hide the delay. It predicts, constantly. It anticipates where a moving ball will be in the next instant, what a face is likely to do next, how a word is most likely to end. Then it weaves those predictions into your perception, so that the moment you experience feels perfectly synchronized with the outside world. even though the raw sensory data is always a step behind. This is why a tennis player can return a serve faster than the signal from the eye could possibly travel, and why you can catch a falling glass before you seem to have noticed it falling. Your brain is living a little ahead of the facts, placing you inside a smoothed-out version of reality that your nerves alone could never deliver in time. Stop here for a moment and let that settle. The now you inhabit is partly memory, partly prediction, and partly a seamless editing job performed in darkness by cells you have never met. Scientists sometimes call this a controlled hallucination. Not hallucination in the frightening sense, but in the technical sense. An experience constructed by the brain that does not correspond, moment for moment, to what is actually happening outside. The match between your experience and the world is good enough to be useful. It is not the same as being true. When you look at a clock and the second hand seems to briefly pause before ticking, that is your brain filling in a small temporal gap. When you feel you heard a knock a split second before the door was touched, it may be your prediction leaking slightly ahead of the signal. The edges of now are softer than they appear, and this is where the suspicion grows a little warmer. Because if the present moment is already a construction, if what you call immediate reality is stitched together from guesses, delays, and invisible edits, then the line between perception and imagination becomes less solid than we normally pretend. You are not looking out through a clear window onto the world. You are living inside a beautifully rendered hallucination that happens to agree with most of the signals it receives, most of the time, not always, and never entirely. Each night, without asking permission, your mind performs something miraculous. It builds an entire world from nothing, lying in bed, eyes closed, body still, muscles quietly paralyzed so you cannot act out what unfolds. Your brain begins producing landscapes, faces, weather, conversations. There are stairways that lead to rooms you have never visited. There are strangers whose voices carry strange familiarity. There are oceans and deserts and skies of colors that have no earthly equivalent. And inside the dream, all of it feels real. Not like a movie, not like imagination. Real. You do not question the presence of people you have never met. You do not doubt the weight of a cup you have never held. Gravity behaves until it does not. Physics bends, and the dreaming self simply adjusts. Only upon waking do you recognize the trick that the entire world you had been moving through was drawn, in full and without a single external input, by you. This happens every night. It has happened billions of times across human history, and once you notice how easily your own mind generates coherent, detailed, emotionally convincing worlds from nothing, a gentle and unavoidable question begins to form. If the machinery for producing a complete reality is already inside your head and already uses it for several hours of every day, what makes waking life so clearly a different kind of thing? We usually answer this by pointing to the senses. In waking life, the world is checked against incoming signals from the eyes and ears and skin. In dreams, those channels are dimmed. That is the standard explanation, and it is a good one, but it sits on an unexamined assumption. It assumes that the waking signals faithfully carry the outside world into us. And as we have already seen, those signals are themselves translated, delayed, predicted, and rearranged long before they reach awareness. So waking life is not raw reality. It is a rendering informed by sensory input. Dream life is a rendering mostly without that input. Both are performances by the same brain, running on the same neural stages, using much of the same equipment. Some scientists have explored this directly. Brain scans during vivid dreams show activity in many of the same visual, emotional, and spatial regions that light up during waking perception. To the brain, in some important sense, a dream and a waking experience are not as different as they feel from the inside. The difference is mostly how strongly external signals are shaping the performance. Now turn this slowly in your mind. If the very same organ that convinces you each night of rain that is not falling, of rooms that do not exist, of lovers who have never lived, can also be the thing producing your experience of this moment, then the certainty you carry about the daytime world deserves to be held just a little more lightly. not dismissed, just loosened. Some have suggested, half playfully, that waking life is simply the dream we all happen to share. Others have wondered whether we share it at all, or merely dream similar enough dreams to mistake them for one. Tonight we are not trying to decide, only to notice, with the softness that comes in the dark, that the mind has been practicing the creation of entire realities every single night of your life, and has gotten very, very good at it. There is a hole in your vision, a real one, and you have never seen it. Somewhere near the center of each eye, there is a small patch of the retina where the optic nerve leaves on its journey to the brain. That patch contains no light-sensitive cells, no rods, no cones, nothing to register an incoming photon. It is literally blind. If you had to rely only on the raw signal from your eyes, you would see two small dark gaps floating in the middle of your visual field, one from each eye, slightly offset. They would follow you everywhere. They would be there right now, but they are not. You do not see them. You never have, because your brain, with quiet confidence, fills them in. It takes the colors and textures and patterns surrounding the missing region and paints over the gap using a best guess. A wall behind you becomes continuous. The night sky stays seamless. A face remains whole. You see a complete world, and the completeness is partly a gentle lie told to you by your own visual system. You can prove it to yourself. There are simple tests where you stare at one small mark on a page with one eye closed, while another mark disappears into the blind spot. When it disappears, you do not see a hole. You see more of the background. Your brain has painted over the absence with invented texture. This is a tiny illusion, almost charming. But pause here for a moment, because the implication is not small at all. If your brain is willing to invent visual detail in one small region, every moment of every day, without your knowledge and without your consent, what else is it willing to invent? Where else in your experience is there a quiet gap being smoothly filled by something your mind decided was probably there? Psychologists have studied many such gaps. The sharpness of your vision, for example, is surprisingly poor outside a tiny central point. But the world never appears blurry, because the brain confidently constructs apparent clarity in your peripheral awareness. Memory has similar features. Conversations get completed after the fact, with missing words replaced by plausible guesses. Entire stretches of experience are, in subtle ways, reconstructed rather than recorded. These are not flaws. They are how perception works. The mind is not a passive mirror. It is an active painter, always finishing an unfinished canvas. And here is the quiet wonder of it. The unity and wholeness of your experience, the feeling that reality is solid, seamless, fully present around you, is partly the result of an enormous invisible editing process. Without it, you would live inside a patchy, stuttering, half-formed world. With it, you live inside something that feels complete effortlessly every moment. So when you look around your room tonight, the walls you see may be mostly accurate, but somewhere in them, your brain is smoothing a gap. Somewhere in your sense of now, a tiny absence has been gently erased. Somewhere in your certainty that the world is solid and present, an artist is quietly adding strokes. Some have suggested that if small gaps can be filled so convincingly, then perhaps the whole canvas itself deserves a moment of wonder, not because it is false, but because the process of making it whole is far stranger and far more intimate than we usually allow ourselves to notice. There is someone inside you who has been there your whole life, the one who hears these words now, the one who wakes each morning and recognizes the face in the mirror as your own, the quiet watcher, the inner voice, the sense of being you. We rarely question this presence. It feels as solid as the ground under our feet. But for a long time, contemplatives, patients, and researchers have been quietly gathering a surprising kind of evidence. The self, it seems, can disappear. And when it does, something remains. Deep meditators sometimes report moments in which the sense of being a separate person dissolves. The boundary between inner and outer softens, and what is left is awareness without anyone clearly owning it. Not oblivion, not sleep, just experience continuing, with no obvious center. Many describe this as profoundly peaceful, sometimes the most peaceful state they have ever known. Under general anesthesia, something even stranger happens. The lights simply go out. There is no sense of time passing. One moment the room is there, the next you are being gently spoken to by a nurse, and hours have passed without your participation. The self was not merely tired, it was briefly absent. And when it returned, it stitched itself back together so seamlessly that most of us never stop to wonder where it went, or whether it truly is the same self that comes back. There are also rare cases, studied carefully by neurologists, in which damage to certain brain regions produces unusual experiences of the self. People who cannot recognize their own limbs as belonging to them, people who feel they are looking at themselves from outside the body, people whose sense of being a unified person becomes temporarily fragmented, as though the inner glue has loosened. None of these are comfortable conditions, but they reveal something important. The self that feels so absolutely real is not a single, indivisible thing. It is a construction, an ongoing assembly built by many parts of the brain working together. When any piece of the machinery changes, the self changes too. This is a quiet kind of wow, because if the self is built, then the solid observer at the center of your world is not quite the fixed point we imagine. It is more like a wave, recognizable, persistent, but actually a pattern in constant motion. Each morning your brain reassembles you. Each night, parts of the assembly dim, shift, or disappear. The continuity feels unbroken because the reassembly is usually so reliable. And now turn this gently toward the evening suspicion. If the self is constructed, and the world is constructed, and both arise inside the same biological process, then the ancient question of who is experiencing whom becomes quietly blurred. The line between the one who sees and the world that is seen may not run where we have always assumed. They may be more like two sides of the same unfolding pattern, mutually dependent, mutually fragile, mutually built. Some traditions have said this for thousands of years. Some neuroscientists are beginning to say it in different words. Neither claims to fully understand it. But tonight, in the softness of the dark, you might notice that the one listening to these words is itself something remarkable. Not a fixed point, not a hard little kernel, something more like a gentle, moving flame. And flames, as we know, are never quite the same from one moment to the next. Almost 4 centuries ago, a man sat alone by a fire, wrapped in a dressing gown, staring into the flames. His name was René Descartes. The room, as he described it, was warm and quiet, the kind of room in which thoughts grow deep and slow. And in that room, he decided to attempt something extraordinary. He decided to doubt everything, not casually, not partially, completely. He resolved to refuse belief in any claim that he could not verify beyond all possible uncertainty. Everything his senses told him, everything he had been taught, everything that seemed obvious, he would set it aside until he found something truly unshakable underneath. And what he discovered, beneath all that doubting, still echoes tonight. First, he noticed that his senses had deceived him before. Sticks looked bent in water, faraway objects appeared small, dreams convinced him of things that were not real. If his senses could be wrong in small ways, perhaps they could be wrong in large ones. Perhaps everything around him, including the fire, including the gown, including his own hands, might be some elaborate deception. Then he imagined an even stranger possibility. What if there was some powerful being, he wrote, who worked constantly to deceive him about the existence of the world? A kind of invisible trickster who filled his mind with convincing impressions of things that did not exist at all. He could not prove such a being was not there, and so, strictly speaking, he could not prove the world was there either. Modern readers sometimes tell a newer version of the same thought. A brain in a vat, a simulation, a dream inside a dream. The details change, but the core question stays the same. Can you be certain that anything exists beyond your own experience? Descartes sat with this possibility and watched as almost everything he believed began to slip away. The room, the fire, the gown, the stars beyond the window, all of them became uncertain. His own body became uncertain. Even the truths of mathematics began to feel, in that state, a little less secure, since a deceiver might be shaping his very reasoning, and yet something resisted. Something would not dissolve, because in order to be deceived, he realized, he had to exist. Something had to be there to be fooled. Something had to be doing the doubting. The act of thinking, even about nothing true, was itself a sign of a thinker. In a single quiet sentence he captured it, the simple recognition that where there is thought, there is someone thinking. This was his unshakable flaw. Not the world, not other people, not even his body, only the bare fact of being a mind that was experiencing anything at all. From our perspective tonight, his conclusion carries a strange weight, because it means the one thing you cannot honestly doubt right now is that some kind of experience is happening. The sound of this voice, the softness of the bed, the quiet interior hum of awareness, all of that is undeniable. Everything beyond it, strictly speaking, requires a leap. Most of us make that leap without noticing. We assume the world, we assume other minds, we assume time and space and history. Descartes did not say these assumptions were wrong. He only noticed that they were assumptions. Solipsism, the idea that only your own mind is certain to exist, does not begin in arrogance. It begins in honesty, in the simple recognition that, of all the things that exist for you, only one of them is observed directly. Everything else is inferred. Look, for a moment, at someone you love, or remember one clearly. The way their eyes move when they listen, the warmth in their voice when they speak your name, the small gestures that somehow contain an entire inner life. It is obvious that they are conscious. It is unquestionable. It is one of the most immediate truths you know, and yet, philosophically, you have never verified it. Not once. Not with any instrument. Not with any argument. You have seen their bodies move. You have heard their words. You have watched their faces respond. Their pupils change. Their tears fall. All of this is behavior. What you have never done and never could do is step inside their experience and confirm that anyone is home. This is what philosophers call the problem of other minds, and it is stranger and harder to solve than most people realize. When you feel your own sadness, you do not have to guess at it. It is simply there, glowing inside the experience itself. But when you perceive sadness in another, you infer it. You notice the downturned mouth, the quiet sigh, the slumped posture, and your mind constructs a matching inner state. Your own sadness becomes the template. You assume that when their body does what your body does during sadness, there is a similar feeling inside. It is a reasonable assumption, probably almost certainly true. Humans share enough biology that this kind of mirror inference works remarkably well, but it remains an inference. The inner experience of the other is never directly available to you. No microscope ever built, no brain scanner, no mathematical formula can cross that final gap and show you what it is like to be someone else. Think of what this means when taken to its edge. The person you love the most in the world is, from the standpoint of certainty, a series of extremely consistent signals. Their warmth is inferred, their joy is inferred. Even the little pauses in their laughter are interpreted by your brain as signs of an inner experience you cannot see. This does not make them less real. It simply makes them more mysterious. The closeness you feel to another person is not built on direct access. It is built on trust, on resemblance, on a lifetime of small correspondences between your feelings and theirs. A bridge built across a gap that, strictly speaking, has never been crossed. Some philosophers have pressed this further. They have pointed out that any evidence we gather about other minds is always behavior, something observable, something physical, and that inner experience, by definition, is not behavior. So no accumulation of data from the outside could ever, in principle, prove the presence of inner experience on the inside. You can only know such a thing from within, and you can only know it from within your own self. Sit with that for a moment. It means the entire social world, every relationship, every conversation, every act of love rests on a foundation that is, at its deepest level, a graceful leap, a hopeful, life-giving, almost miraculous leap that we take every single day, usually without noticing. Some have wondered whether the leap is too large to be justified. Others find it more beautiful precisely because it cannot be justified. A small act of faith inside the everyday. Tonight we are not taking a side, only noticing that even the people you love most have never, technically, been proven to dream. A little more than 3 centuries ago, an Irish bishop and philosopher named George Berkeley suggested something that most people of his time found absurd, and that some people of our time find oddly familiar. He suggested that to exist is to be perceived. He did not mean this as a metaphor. He meant it as a description of how reality works. For Berkeley, the chair in your room is not an independent object that happens to also be visible. It is, in some deep sense, made of perception. Its color, its shape, its hardness, its weight, all of these are experiences. Without a mind to experience them, Berkeley argued, it is not clear what would remain. Strip away every perception of the chair, and you are left not with a chair in itself, but with a word, an idea, a placeholder. This sounds radical until you look closely. Because whenever you try to describe the chair without reference to any perception, without its color, its texture, its temperature, its shape as seen from somewhere, you find that you are left with very little. Philosophers still argue about whether anything at all is left. A famous objection to Berkeley ran like this: if existence requires being perceived, then when no one is in the forest, does a tree fall quietly, or silently, or at all? Berkeley's answer, spoken in the language of his faith, was that a vast and attentive mind was always perceiving everything, and so the world remained continuous whether or not any human happened to be watching. We do not need to take a position on that particular answer tonight, but the question itself is worth sitting with, because in modern physics, of all places, a strange cousin of Berkeley's idea has appeared. In quantum experiments, the act of measurement appears to play a peculiar role in fixing what is observed. A particle that has not been measured behaves as though it has many possibilities at once. Once measured, it seems to settle into a single value. Whether this is because measurement forces a choice, or because observation reveals something about reality's fine structure, remains one of the deepest debates in science. No serious physicist believes that human consciousness literally creates the moon. That interpretation is often exaggerated in popular writing, but the gentler, stranger fact, that observation seems to matter in ways our everyday intuitions never prepared us for, is real, and it is still being puzzled over by careful minds. So Berkeley's whisper is not entirely a relic. A thin echo of it drifts through modern physics, through the philosophy of perception, through the science of the brain. The idea that reality may be woven more deeply with mind than we used to assume is not proven, it is not established, but it is no longer as silly as it once sounded to the confident observers of an earlier age. Here is where the evening's quiet suspicion begins to feel a little more spacious, because if perception plays any role at all in the shape of reality, if the world is not simply a stage on which minds happen to walk, but is somehow bound up with the presence of minds, then the question of whether anything exists unwatched becomes less obviously answerable. You, lying here in the dark, attending to these words, may be doing something far stranger than merely noticing the world. You may be, in some quiet sense, sustaining a small corner of it, not as a boast, only as a whisper. Which is exactly how Berkeley preferred to deliver it. Imagine someone who looks exactly like your closest friend. Same face, same voice, same laugh, same quick glance, same familiar smile when they recognize you from across a room. Their body moves in every expected way. Their words are identical. Their memory of your shared history is perfect, but on the inside there is no one home, no feelings, no experiences, no inner glow of awareness, just biological machinery producing the exact behaviors of a person, while the lights behind the eyes are not on. No pain, no pleasure, no sense of being at all. Philosophers call this thought experiment the philosophical zombie, not the shuffling kind from horror films. These zombies are undetectable. From the outside, in every possible way, they are identical to a conscious person. They will even claim to feel things. They will describe love, wonder, sadness, and boredom in perfectly accurate language. But the inside, the felt quality, the inner presence, is simply absent. The reason this strange idea is discussed so seriously is not because anyone believes such beings walk among us. It is because asking whether they are conceivable reveals something surprisingly deep about the nature of consciousness. If you can imagine a being that behaves exactly like a conscious person but has no inner experience, then consciousness seems to be something extra, something beyond behavior, something not fully captured by any physical description of the brain. Because two beings could be, by assumption, physically identical, and yet differ in whether there is any experience happening inside. If this is even possible to conceive, it hints that the inner light of awareness might not be the same thing as the mechanics of the brain. They may be deeply linked, they may be inseparable in practice, but they do not seem to be identical, and this raises a quiet, unsettling question. How do you know the people around you are not, in some subtler sense, closer to this picture than you assume? How can you tell the difference between a friend whose inner world is rich and bright and a friend who is perfectly simulating the behavior of such a world, with nothing behind the performance? You cannot. Not from the outside. That is the whole uncomfortable point. Most of us resolve this by noticing that we ourselves are clearly conscious, and assuming that beings who resemble us must be too. It is a reasonable assumption, probably correct, certainly life-affirming, but it is not a proof. It is a generous, unverifiable extension of your own certainty about yourself to everyone else. Now let the thought turn slowly in your mind. You are the one being in the entire universe whose consciousness is directly known, in fact, as the only thing that could not possibly be mistaken. Every other candidate for consciousness is inferred. You grant awareness to your family, your friends, strangers on the street, pets, perhaps animals in the forest. Each grant is an act of imagination on your part. Each is generous, each is graceful, each remains strictly unconfirmed. This does not mean other people are zombies. Almost certainly they are not. But the possibility of imagining them as such, without any logical absurdity, is itself a strange clue. It suggests that consciousness, your consciousness, has a peculiar status in the universe, unique, directly given, impossible to share. Tonight, as you lie in the quiet, notice the small miracle that you, and only you, are the one inside your experience. Everyone else, so warm and real to you, has only ever been met at the edges. Long before Descartes sat by his fire, long before modern philosophers argued about zombies and minds, other thinkers in distant places had already been quietly circling the same questions. They arrived by different paths, through meditation rather than argument, through silence rather than syllogism, and in their own languages, they kept returning to a similar whisper. The world, they suggested, may not be exactly what it appears, and the self that seems to stand in the middle of it may not be what it appears either. In the old Indian traditions, there is a word, Maya, that has many meanings depending on the school that uses it. At its gentlest, it points to the illusory quality of everyday appearances, the way the world presents itself as more solid, more separate, and more independent than it truly is. Not unreal exactly, but not quite real in the way we normally assume. A shimmer on the surface, a dance. A related idea appears in Buddhist thought, often translated as emptiness. Not the empty of a barren room, but the empty of inherent separateness. The notion that no thing stands alone, that every object, every moment, every self is woven from countless relationships, and that if you look closely enough for a fixed independent core, you will not find one. What you find instead is a web, endlessly giving rise to itself. Meditators in these traditions sometimes describe something they experience through long, patient practice, the softening of the boundary between perceiver and perceived. They do not reach this state by argument. They reach it by sitting, by watching the mind, by noticing that the sense of being a separate self is itself an experience, and that the experience, like all experiences, arises and dissolves. In certain non-dual traditions, this reaches its simplest expression. Awareness and its contents are not two separate things. The one who hears and the sounds that are heard are, in some essential way, aspects of a single event. The witness and the witnessed are both appearances within a larger, unnamed openness. These are not claims about physics. They are reports from the inside of minds that have spent lifetimes studying themselves. And it is remarkable how closely some of those reports resemble the quiet conclusions reached by philosophers and even certain neuroscientists through very different methods. The brain, after all, does not have a single location where the self lives. It has many regions that contribute to the sense of being someone. The world, too, as physics has slowly shown, does not come pre-packaged in separate solid pieces. It is a field of relationships, a dance of forces, a pattern whose parts only make sense in relation to one another. When two traditions, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, arrive at strangely compatible intuitions, it does not prove they are right, but it is a soft nudge, a hint. It suggests that the feeling of being a separate self inside an independent world may be something the human mind tends to see through whenever it looks carefully enough, no matter which culture it looks from. And here, in the quiet of tonight, you can let this sit without needing to decide. You do not need to become a meditator or a philosopher or a physicist. You only need to notice that the walls between you and the world are a little less solid than they usually pretend to be, a little more porous, a little more alive. Some traditions have called this a great mystery. Others have simply called it home. There is a question in philosophy that has been named, with deliberate gentleness, the hard problem. It is called hard not because no one has tried to solve it, but because every attempt so far has run into the same strange wall. The question is this: why does any of this feel like something? Look at a candle flame. You can describe it completely in scientific terms. You can list the molecules in the wax, the oxygen they react with, the heat released, the wavelengths of light produced. You can describe how those wavelengths enter your eye, how they trigger chemical cascades in your cells, how signals travel to the visual cortex, how patterns of neurons fire in complex arrangements. And yet, after all of that, after the full biological, chemical, physical account, there is still something left unexplained: the experience of seeing the flame, the warm, soft inner quality of the visual impression, the fact that there is someone present right now to whom the flame is appearing. Physical science, so extraordinary in explaining what happens, has not yet explained why any of it should be accompanied by experience at all. You could imagine, in principle, a universe in which all the same physical processes occurred, but without a single flicker of inner life anywhere. Particles, brains, bodies, behavior, just no one home anywhere. That imaginary universe would be, according to our current physical descriptions, indistinguishable from our own, and yet ours somehow has experience in it, at least one point of it, and probably many. That is the hard problem. Not how the brain works, but why the brain's work is accompanied by a felt, inside, lived quality that does not seem to fit neatly into any known physical category. Philosophers have proposed many approaches. Some believe the hard problem will eventually dissolve as science advances, much as earlier mysteries did. Others suspect that consciousness may be something more fundamental than we have yet recognized, not a byproduct of complex arrangements of matter, but perhaps a basic feature of reality itself, present in ways that our current frameworks have not fully captured. These are not mainstream views in every field, but they are taken seriously by careful thinkers and explored gently in ongoing work. We do not have to settle the debate tonight. What is worth carrying with you is the recognition that consciousness, the simple everyday fact of there being something it is like to be you, is, at present, among the deepest mysteries in science. Not a trivial puzzle, not a gap waiting for next year's paper, a genuine, humble limit on what we currently understand. And within that limit, a small possibility opens up. If consciousness is more fundamental than we have usually assumed, then the inner experience at the center of your life may not be an accidental feature added to matter. It may be closer to the basic fabric of things, in which case the mind that is listening to these words is not a curious accident in an otherwise unfeeling cosmos. It is perhaps more central than we ever imagined. This does not confirm tonight's suspicion. It does not declare that you are the only thing that exists, but it quietly moves consciousness from the edge of the picture toward the center. It invites the possibility that the inside is not just a private room inside a public world, but may be deeply tangled with what the public world is made of in the first place. A soft thought for a soft hour, worth carrying into the deeper dark. There is a story often told, sometimes carelessly, about quantum physics. The story goes that particles know when you are looking at them, that conscious observation shapes reality, that the universe at the smallest scales somehow responds to the act of being watched. The story is mostly wrong in the way it is usually told, but under the exaggerations, there is something genuinely strange and genuinely unsettled that has puzzled physicists for almost a century now. Let us begin gently. At the scale of atoms and particles, the world does not behave the way our intuitions expect. A single particle, before being measured, does not have a clear position or a clear velocity the way a baseball does. It is described by something called a wave function, which contains a spread of possibilities, places it might be found, values it might carry, paths it might have taken. These possibilities are not ignorance on our part, they seem to be real features of the particle's situation. Then something remarkable happens. When the particle is measured, when some interaction forces it to take on a definite value for a definite property, the spread of possibilities appears to collapse. One outcome is registered. The rest seem to vanish, or at least become irrelevant. The universe at that moment seems to make a choice. What counts as measurement? This is where the mystery grows quiet and deep. Most physicists will tell you correctly that measurement does not require a conscious mind. A particle can interact with another particle. A photon can strike a detector. A tiny system can entangle with a larger one. Any of these can count as measurement, and the strange collapse happens. No human eyes are required. No awareness is needed to make the universe behave. But here is the part that many honest physicists will admit is still not fully understood. Why measurement has this special status, and what exactly draws the line between a quantum possibility and a definite outcome, these remain open questions. Different interpretations of quantum mechanics answer them differently. Some say there is no real collapse, only branching. Some say hidden variables underlie everything. Some say the wave function is a description of knowledge rather than reality. Each interpretation has its defenders. None is proven. And so, within this ongoing puzzle, the role of the observer remains a subject of careful wonder. The popular image, where human consciousness directly shapes the moon, is an exaggeration, but the deeper truth is still remarkable. It is that the smooth, deterministic world of classical physics, in which objects exist independently whether we look or not, is not quite the world our best theories describe at the smallest scales. Something about how reality settles into definite outcomes involves interaction, information, context. The picture of a mind-independent world of things in themselves turns out to be, at the very least, more complicated than it appears. For tonight, the important thing is this gentleness. We do not need to overstate the case. We do not need to claim that the universe requires your mind to exist. It almost certainly does not, but the confident separation between inner experience and outer world, between watcher and watched, between mind and matter, a separation modern life often treats as obvious, begins to tremble a little in the light of quantum physics. Not enough to collapse, enough to wobble, and in a night like this one, a small wobble is sometimes all that is needed to make the world feel quietly, beautifully unfinished. Long ago, a Greek philosopher named Plato invited his readers to imagine a cave. Inside it, prisoners had been chained since birth, facing a wall. Behind them a fire burned, and between the fire and them, shapes were carried past, casting flickering shadows on the wall they faced. The prisoners, knowing nothing else, took those shadows for reality. They named them, argued about them, grew skilled at predicting their movements. They lived entire lives inside a projection, mistaking it for the whole of the world. Centuries later, in a very different vocabulary, a modern philosopher named Nick Bostrom offered a fresh version of the same intuition. not shadows on a wall, something subtler. He suggested, as a careful thought experiment, that if any civilization ever develops the ability to run extremely detailed computer simulations of conscious beings, simulations indistinguishable from real life to those inside them, then the number of simulated minds would likely come to vastly outnumber the original non-simulated ones. And if that ever happened, then the odds that any given mind chosen at random is one of the original minds rather than a simulated one would become vanishingly small. Notice the shape of this argument. It is not a claim that we are in a simulation. It is a probabilistic wondering. It says that either such simulations will never be built, or civilizations advanced enough to build them choose not to. Or, if simulations do exist in large numbers, then most conscious minds at any given moment are likely running inside them. Physicists and philosophers have taken this seriously enough to examine it carefully. No one has found a way to prove or disprove it. Any evidence you might look for, strange glitches, repeating patterns, hidden limits in the fabric of physics, could be explained in ordinary ways, or could be beyond the reach of anything inside the simulation to detect. It is important not to frighten yourself with this idea. It is also important not to dismiss it too quickly, because even the act of considering it tells us something interesting about how we stand in relation to reality, because here is a quiet truth. The simulation argument, whatever you think of its probabilities, is a modern dress on an ancient doubt. It is the cave, rebuilt in silicon. It is Descartes' deceiver given a processor. It is a new way of asking the old question that has followed thoughtful people through every age. Can you be certain that what seems to be the world is the world? And the answer, as always, is that you cannot. Not with full certainty. The very structure of being a mind prevents you from stepping outside yourself to verify the stage on which you stand. Some people find this terrifying. Others find it liberating. Still others find it beside the point. Whatever the underlying substrate of reality turns out to be, the experience we are living is still the experience we are living. The warmth of a loved one is still warmth. The taste of bread is still bread. The quiet of this hour is still, in the only sense that matters to you, real. Tonight, we do not need to decide whether any simulation is running. We only need to notice that the question, asked carefully, does not break us. It deepens us. It reminds us that reality has always been stranger, at its edges, than the confident versions we build during the day, and some of that strangeness is worth carrying gently into the dark. In the late 1800s, an Austrian physicist named Ludwig Boltzmann was trying to understand why the universe, at large scales, seems to flow in a particular direction through time, why things fall apart rather than assemble themselves, why heat spreads out rather than gathering in, why, in short, yesterday is different from tomorrow. Along the way, he stumbled into a strange and uncomfortable possibility, one that physicists have argued about ever since. Boltzmann knew that at the level of molecules, nature is mostly about statistics. In any large collection of particles, certain arrangements are astronomically more common than others. Most arrangements are disordered. Orderly arrangements, a room of air where all the molecules clump into one corner, say, are possible but extraordinarily rare. But rare is not the same as impossible. Given enough time, even very unlikely arrangements can occur by pure chance. And if the universe lasts long enough, or is large enough, then random fluctuations could, in principle, produce astonishing patterns of brief order, including, in theory, the spontaneous appearance of something like a fully functioning conscious brain, a brain with memories, a brain with a sense of self, a brain that believes it has lived a life, has family, has walked on two legs under a blue sky, all of it produced, just for a moment, by an incredibly unlikely chance arrangement of particles fluctuating out of a much greater chaos. This imaginary being has come to be called a Boltzmann brain. Now, no one seriously believes that Boltzmann brains are common in our ordinary environment. Our brains, as far as we can tell, developed slowly over vast stretches of time, through biology, evolution, culture. The fluctuation scenario is vastly more unlikely, on short timescales, than the normal story, but it becomes a concern in certain cosmological models. Some models suggest that the far future of the universe, if it continues expanding for long enough, could contain enormous stretches of empty space in which random fluctuations continue indefinitely over unimaginable lengths of time. Such fluctuations might produce many more Boltzmann brains than there have ever been ordinary brains in the history of all living beings. If that were true, then most conscious observers across the history of the cosmos would be fluctuation minds, not beings like us. And since those fluctuation minds would sincerely believe, without reason to doubt, that their memories corresponded to real events, we would have no obvious way of being sure we are not among them. This possibility is sometimes used by physicists as a kind of warning signal. If a cosmological model predicts that most observers are Boltzmann brains, many scientists treat that as a sign the model is probably wrong, because it would undermine the reasoning used to build scientific theories in the first place. Here is the gentler use of this idea, the one worth holding in the quiet of the night. It is another reminder that the confidence we place in our memories, in our sense of a long, continuous life, in the outside world that seems to stretch beyond our skulls, rests on assumptions we cannot fully verify from the inside. Most of the time, those assumptions are excellent. The ordinary story is almost certainly right. You are not a fluctuation. You are a person with a history. But the fact that a physicist could even sketch such a possibility with serious mathematics hints at how porous the line between inner and outer really is. Even the cosmos, at its edges, appears unsure about who exactly is real. There is an old assumption about reality that has been sitting quietly in the background of almost everything we have ever believed. The assumption is that the universe is made of stuff, hard, small, self-existing stuff. Atoms, particles, matter. The world in this picture is a vast collection of things arranged in space, moving through time. This is such a natural picture that it feels like common sense, but physics over the last century has been slowly softening it from the inside. Because as physicists have looked closer, matter has become less like stuff and more like relationships. Atoms turn out to be mostly empty space, and the solid feeling of a table comes from fields and forces rather than from anything you could call substance. Particles are better described as excitations in fields, patterns that arise and move through underlying mathematical structures. The boundary between object and process becomes harder to draw the deeper you look, and in certain theoretical frameworks, something even more surprising begins to appear. Some physicists now explore the possibility that the deepest layer of reality may not be matter at all, but information. Not computer-style information, bits on a hard drive, but something more fundamental. Patterns, relations, distinctions that make a difference. The idea, still debated, is that what the universe is made of, at its most basic level, might be closer to a process of knowing than to a collection of things. The term some have used for this is elegant, it from bit. It meaning the physical object, bit meaning the unit of information. The suggestion, offered gently, is that the solid reality we experience might arise from something more abstract, more relational, more like a structure of distinctions than a pile of stuff. This is not a mainstream certainty. It remains one possibility among several. Other physicists disagree for good reasons, but even as a serious candidate framework, it changes how one might imagine the cosmos, because if the universe is, at bottom, something like a process of information rather than a heap of matter, then the presence of minds becomes less of a puzzle. Minds, after all, are themselves patterns of information. They are structures of distinctions, relationships, flows. They would no longer be strange little bubbles of inner experience, floating awkwardly in a world that does not speak their language. They would be expressions of the same underlying fabric. Turn this slowly in your mind. If reality is closer to a conversation than to a warehouse, then the listener and the spoken word are not as separate as we often assume. Each arises in the presence of the other. The world of things becomes a world of relationships. The world of relationships becomes a world of information. And information, as any careful scientist will note, is not a thing. It is a pattern that exists only in context, only where there is something to distinguish, and something to do the distinguishing. You can feel where this touches the suspicion we are following tonight. If reality is informational, and minds are informational, and information only makes sense in context, then the picture of a lonely mind inside a dead universe becomes harder to sustain. The universe and the mind may not be as separate as they appear. They may be partners in a pattern neither can complete alone. No one claims to have the final answer. Some of the greatest thinkers remain divided. But the mere fact that serious people are taking such ideas seriously is itself a soft, strange comfort. Your inner life may fit into the cosmos more snugly than you are told. There is a curious fact about the universe that has quietly haunted physicists for decades. It is not a flashy paradox. It is not a cosmic disaster. It is just a subtle observation that becomes stranger the longer you look at it. The universe appears to be finely tuned for the possibility of observers. What does that mean? Physicists have identified a handful of numbers that describe the basic behavior of the cosmos, the strength of gravity, the mass of certain particles, the force holding atomic nuclei together, the balance between expansion and collapse in the early universe. These numbers are, as far as we can tell, free parameters. There is no known deeper law that tells them what they must be. They simply are what they are. And yet, when scientists have imagined universes with slightly different values, they have found something remarkable. Most of those imagined universes would be sterile. In some, no stable atoms would form. In others, stars would never ignite or would burn out too quickly. In still others, galaxies could not assemble, chemistry could not develop, and nothing like life could ever arise. Our universe, by contrast, sits in a narrow range where atoms, stars, planets, and chemistry are possible. The conditions that allow for complexity, for biology, for minds, those conditions seem to depend on a surprisingly precise set of parameters. This observation is called fine-tuning, and it has been debated in many different directions. Some see it as a sign of deeper laws we have not yet discovered. Some see it as evidence of a multiverse, where many universes with different parameters exist, and we happen to find ourselves in one of the rare hospitable ones. Some see it as suggesting something beyond physics entirely. These interpretations differ, and no one has yet reached a consensus. But there is a simpler thread that connects them all, and it is the one worth sitting with tonight. Whatever explanation one favors, there is a quiet circularity in our very ability to notice the fine-tuning. We can observe the universe only because the universe has the kind of parameters that allow observers. If the values were different, there would be no one here to ask why they are not different. The fact that you are here, listening to this, reflecting on the cosmos, this is itself tied to the cosmos being the kind of place that allows you to be here at all. Physicists call this kind of reasoning anthropic, from an ancient word for human. It does not mean the universe is about us. It means that any universe we can observe must be compatible with observers, otherwise no one would be there to observe. This is a soft idea, but it has sharp implications, because it means the presence of minds is not a stray accident at the end of a long physical process. It is, at least in a gentle sense, baked into the kind of universe we are able to notice. The cosmos we experience is, by definition, one that produces experience. No other kind of cosmos is visible to a creature like us. You lie here in the dark tonight, inside a universe whose laws, constants, and ancient history conspired, through mechanisms we partly understand, to allow a mind to form within it. A mind that is now wondering about its own place. A mind that is, in this quiet hour, gently asking how strange it is to be here at all. Some have seen in this a humbling sign of smallness. Others have felt, in it, a kind of quiet belonging. Both responses remain honest. Both can rest side by side. Think of a moment from long ago, perhaps a birthday from childhood, perhaps the face of someone you loved who is no longer present, perhaps a small ordinary day that somehow stayed with you, a sunset, a kitchen table, a voice calling you inside. It feels permanent. It feels preserved. It feels like a small photograph in a vast internal album, carefully stored and waiting to be retrieved. But memory is not a photograph. Not remotely. Every time you recall a memory, your brain does not play back a recording. It constructs the memory anew, using fragments of neural activity from the time of the original experience, mixed with information from your current state, your present mood, your present knowledge, your current beliefs about who you are. Then, when you are finished remembering, that freshly assembled version is stored again, slightly changed, slightly updated, and the new version replaces the old one as the reference for next time. Memory, it turns out, is closer to rewriting than to reading. Each act of recollection changes what is remembered. The more often a memory is visited, the more it shifts. Your oldest, most precious memories are, in a sense, the ones that have been rewritten the most times. This is not a flaw. It is how memory actually works, according to decades of careful experimental research. And once you see it, many everyday mysteries become clearer. Why do two siblings remember the same family event so differently? Because each has rewritten their version many times, guided by their own later experiences. Why do childhood memories sometimes carry an emotional tone that does not match the original event? Because the later, adult self has been quietly editing them, adding meaning, softening edges, sharpening others. Now notice what this means for the feeling of having a long life. The past you carry inside you is not a fixed record. It is a living document. The you who experienced a given moment is not exactly the same as the you who now remembers it, and the version of the moment that you have access to is in some measurable way shaped by every version of you who has ever returned to it. This is a quiet marvel, because it means your personal history is partly an ongoing act of creation, not fabrication, not dishonesty, just the natural way minds hold on to time. Memory is less like a library and more like an ancient manuscript rewritten each generation, with small corrections, small embellishments, and a fundamental continuity that nonetheless drifts over decades. You are, in a real sense, the author of your own past. And here the evening's slow suspicion takes on a new tone, because if the past you know is one you continually reconstruct, then the sense that you have lived in a solid, unchanging world becomes softer. The world you remember is partly the world you remember remembering. Layers within layers. Each experience stored, then recalled, then restored, then recalled again. Each time a little different. This does not make your life unreal. It makes your life more intimately yours than you may have realized. No one else has walked inside your memories. No one else has contributed to their rewriting. The private universe you carry between your temples is truly private, not only because others cannot enter, but because you yourself are endlessly rebuilding it, one quiet act of remembrance at a time. The photographs inside your head are always being developed again, and each time, by hands that have grown slightly older than the last, there is a person you have known your whole life, a continuous figure with your name, the one who did things you still remember, made choices you still own, became who you are today. You carry this person with you everywhere, like a familiar companion you have never actually seen in full, only felt. But here is a quiet surprise, one that neuroscientists and philosophers have been circling for years. That continuous figure is a story, not a fixed fact, but a story, stitched together, moment by moment, by parts of your brain whose job is to make sense of experience. There is no single organ that contains yourself. There is no particular cluster of neurons where the you is stored. Instead, there is a process, an ongoing active process, that produces the sense of being a single unified person. If you think of the brain as a vast orchestra of systems, each handling different slices of experience, one for vision, one for emotion, one for planning, one for language, countless more, then the self is not the conductor, it is the music. It is the continuous impression of unity that arises when all these systems coordinate well enough that their output feels like a single performance. Neurologists have studied what happens when parts of this coordination break down. People with certain conditions can lose the sense of owning their own body while continuing to perceive it. Others can experience the impression that their actions are being caused by some external force, even though they are generating them. Still others can feel that their emotional self and their thinking self are momentarily separate. These are not signs that such people have lost a real self that was there before. They are signs that the self is produced continuously by specific brain processes, and when those processes falter, the product falters too. This might sound cold. Actually, it is rather beautiful, because it means that you, the you listening to these words, are a kind of living composition, not a fixed object placed inside the body, but an ongoing piece of music the brain plays on itself, using everything it has, every moment you are awake. The character you take yourself to be is written by your mind as it moves through time, choosing which parts of your experience to emphasize, which to link together, which to quietly set aside. We all recognize this at a smaller scale. When we tell a friend about our week, we do not list every second. We choose, we shape, we find a thread. The result sounds like a story about ourselves, but even without an audience, the mind is always doing something like this internally, in a long, quiet hum beneath awareness, turning raw experience into the ongoing narrative of a self. So the protagonist of your life is, in a very real sense, written by you moment by moment, and the writing never stops. Notice how gently this touches tonight's thread. If the self is a narrative, then the unshakable observer at the center of your world is itself a construction, a kind of character held together by ongoing storytelling, and the private world that character inhabits, with its remembered past, its expected future, its felt present, is the stage on which the story keeps being told. You are not less real for this. You are more intricate, a living story, aware of itself, an author who happens also to be the page. Some have found this thought unsettling. Others have found it the most accurate description of what it feels like to be a person they have ever encountered. Both responses are honest. Notice how this hour feels. The slow settling of your body, the quiet between sentences, the sense, perhaps, that time is moving gently, neither rushing nor standing still, but passing in a soft, almost musical way. Now imagine a very different hour. An afternoon in a waiting room. Each minute stretched into something enormous, the clock on the wall growing unbearable. The same amount of time, measured by any outside instrument, felt almost longer than possible. Or remember an hour of joy, a long-awaited reunion, a first kiss, a conversation that felt like only minutes, until you looked up and the sky had changed. The same 60 minutes. Wildly different experiences of duration. Time, it turns out, is not a single thing. It is at least two things. There is physical time, measured by clocks and atoms and the rotation of the earth, and there is subjective time, the texture of duration felt from the inside. These two are related, but they are not the same. And the difference between them is one of the most curious findings in modern psychology. Researchers have identified several factors that stretch or compress subjective time. Attention is one. When the mind is deeply absorbed, time seems to flow quickly. When it is restless and waiting, time seems to crawl. Novelty is another. A week spent in a new place, full of unfamiliar sights, feels longer in memory than a week of routine. Emotion plays a role as well. Fear stretches seconds, joy compresses hours, and aging introduces its own slow transformation. Many people notice that years seem to pass more quickly as they grow older. One possible reason is that each new year represents a smaller fraction of the total life lived so far. When you are 5, a year is 1/5 of everything. When you are 50, it is 1/50th. Another reason may be that routine reduces the number of novel experiences, and novel experiences are what the brain uses to mark time in memory. So time inside you has a texture, a rhythm, a quality that changes with state and circumstance. It is not a neutral river flowing evenly past a watching self. It is more like a fabric whose weave loosens and tightens depending on what you are weaving it for. This is where the night's larger thread picks up the thought. If time is, at least partly, a construction produced from within, if the very sense of duration arises from how the brain processes experience, then the present moment is not just a snapshot of an external clock, it is also an inner product, a shaped, textured, personal unfolding. In deep concentration, time can seem to vanish. In meditation, it can open into an almost spacious stillness. In dreams, it can collapse and expand in ways that bear no resemblance to the minutes ticking on a bedside clock. In near-death experiences, many people report vast sequences of impressions compressed into tiny intervals of measurable time. What these diverse experiences have in common is the revelation that subjective time is not simply a mirror of the outside. It has its own life. Tonight, perhaps, you can feel this as a gentle gift. The hour you are listening through is, in some deep sense, your own hour. Not a borrowed slice of a universal clock, but an unfolding texture shaped by your attention, your emotion, your slow approach to rest. And if time itself is partly made inside you, then the private universe you carry is larger than we usually imagine. It holds not only its own colors and memories, but its own pace. The world outside will keep its clocks. Your inside keeps its own. Here is a quiet puzzle. If every mind constructs its own world, its own colors, its own textured time, its own narrative self, and if each of these constructions is private, sealed, not directly accessible to anyone else, then how is it that our constructions line up so well? When you and a friend sit across a table and both describe the coffee between you as hot, dark, and slightly bitter, your two private experiences match each other closely enough to make conversation possible. When two strangers watch the same sunset, they often agree about the colors, the beauty, the direction of the light. When millions of people hear the same piece of music, they recognize the same melody, the same mood, the same pauses. Given how personal perception is, this agreement is more remarkable than it first appears. Science has several partial answers. We share much of the same biology. Our eyes use similar kinds of light-sensitive cells. Our brains have similar structures for processing shapes, sounds, and emotions. We grow up in cultures that teach us shared labels for shared phenomena. Physical reality presumably constrains our constructions so that whatever is really out there keeps each of our inner worlds roughly anchored to the same referent. All of these explanations are good. None of them is quite complete, because no matter how deeply we examine the outer world and the inner brain, the moment where one person's private experience aligns with another's remains outside direct inspection. We can see the similar signals, the similar neural firing, the similar behavior. We cannot see the similar experiences. The inside of each mind stays sealed. Yet somehow from the outside, the alignments are astonishing. Some have called this the shared dream question, not because reality is a dream, but because the closeness of our private worlds has something dreamlike about it, as if many people were, in their own private screenings, watching versions of the same film, recognizing each other's reactions, comparing notes about scenes none of them can ever show one another directly. There is a certain quiet awe in noticing this, because the everyday miracle of ordinary life, the fact that you can speak a word and have another mind, somewhere else, form a concept similar enough to yours that you can build an entire relationship on it, depends on this uncanny alignment between sealed private worlds, language, love, cooperation, culture, science itself. All of it rides on the fact that our private constructions share structure, even though their contents remain unverifiable from the outside. Tonight, this touches the larger thread in a gentle way, because the evening's suspicion that you might be the only thing that exists is one extreme answer to the puzzle. It says, the alignments are so perfect because there is only one mind doing all the imagining. On the other extreme is the classical picture, in which countless independent minds happen to share a single objective reality that keeps them in tune. But there may be subtler answers resting between these extremes. Perhaps reality is relational, and minds co-create a shared structure through their interactions. Perhaps consciousness itself is more unified at a deep level than our separate bodies suggest. Perhaps the alignment is not something to be explained away, but something to be quietly marveled at, as one of the strangest gentle gifts of existence. We do not have to choose tonight, only to notice that the fact of shared experience, the very thing we take most for granted, is itself a small daily miracle. The private dream you are inside happens, astonishingly, to resemble the private dreams of almost everyone you know. There is a kind of loneliness that can surface when these ideas are taken seriously. The thought that your experience is private, that no one has ever directly entered your inner world, that even your most intimate relationships live on the edges of a gap that cannot, in principle, be crossed. If you have felt a touch of this in the course of the evening, it is worth being gentle with that feeling. It is also worth turning it slowly, because on the other side of the same thought lies something very different. Consider language. You open your mouth, and small vibrations of air travel outward. Another person hears them, and inside their brain, something strangely specific happens. A concept you were holding in your mind, perhaps the image of a particular childhood tree, or the feeling of missing someone, arises in some analogous form inside theirs, not identically, never identically, but close enough that the two of you can refer to it together, build on it, weep over it, laugh about it, write a poem about it 50 years later. This is extraordinary. The gap between two private worlds is real, but the bridges that cross it, imperfect, shaky, but daily used, are themselves astonishing structures. Consider empathy. When someone you love is in pain, you do not merely notice their pain in the way you notice a chair. You feel it. Not identically to their feeling, of course, but there is a resonance. Regions of your own brain involved in pain activate when you witness theirs. When they smile, something in you smiles in return. When their voice softens, yours often softens too. Your nervous system responds to theirs in subtle, measurable ways. Scientists have studied this kind of mirroring, and it turns out to be deeply woven into how humans function in groups. We are built to tune ourselves to one another. Our heart rates can synchronize in conversation, our breathing can align when we listen closely. In deep moments of shared experience, even brain rhythms can drift toward a kind of coordination. This does not prove that minds merge. They do not. But it shows that the boundary between minds is not a hard wall. It is more like a semi-porous membrane through which signals, rhythms, resonances, and meanings pass constantly. Now bring this back to the evening's suspicion. Even if the world is deeply private, even if each of us is, in some sense, living inside a constructed reality no one else can fully share, this does not mean we are alone. The same science that reveals the sealed nature of experience also reveals the remarkable ways in which experiences tune to one another. You can never fully know another person, that is true, but you can meet them again and again in countless small harmonies. A glance held for a moment longer than needed, a word that lands exactly as meant, a long silence between close friends that feels more eloquent than any speech. Each of these is a quiet crossing of the gap, not by leap but by resonance. Some traditions have suggested that beneath the separateness of minds, there may be a deeper unity that our everyday awareness does not ordinarily perceive. Some philosophers have suggested the opposite, that the miracle is precisely that separate minds can meet at all. Both views point to the same observation from different sides. Connection is not guaranteed. It is also not impossible. It is something soft and continuous, woven every day from small gestures that somehow know how to find each other. Loneliness and intimacy live closer together than we usually notice. Tonight, you can feel both and let neither win. Let us turn the strange question one way, gently, just for a while. Suppose it were true. Suppose, strictly speaking, you really were the only thing that exists. All of this, the dim light in your room, the memory of your childhood, the people you will see tomorrow, the history of civilization, the stars above the atmosphere, all of it a production of your single mind, with no one else home anywhere. What would that look like from the inside? It would look surprisingly exactly like this. Every experience you have had would remain. Every conversation would have happened, in the sense that you remember it happening. The world would continue to behave with stunning consistency. Nothing in your daily life would change. Solipsism, taken seriously, is a position that does not make waves on the surface of experience. It changes the interpretation, not the content. But notice something. As soon as you try to live inside this idea for more than a few moments, it starts to fray in small, telling ways. For one thing, you are constantly surprised by things happening in the world, by things people say, by things your own mind does. If the universe were only a production of your mind, you might expect a certain smoothness, a sense that deep down you know what is coming. Instead, you are met, hour after hour, by the unexpected. You encounter ideas you did not invent, reactions you did not foresee, patterns you did not plan. For another thing, you are often wrong. Your predictions about people fail. Your memory turns out to be inaccurate. Your most confident beliefs get overturned by facts you did not choose. If you were the author of everything, you would seem to be authoring endlessly things that correct and contradict your own earlier chapters. And then there are the tiny details. The precise way a friend laughs, the unexpected shape of a cloud, the strange specific bend of a leaf on a walk, the fine texture of reality, down to its smallest grains, is filled with detail that no single mind could plausibly be generating by itself from moment to moment. The universe seems to be much more detailed than you are. Philosophers have noticed all of this. Surprise, error, and rich detail are often taken as gentle evidence against strict solipsism. Not because they disprove it, strictly, nothing can disprove it, but because they make it increasingly awkward to hold. If the world is only your mind is a strangely generous host, constantly surprising itself. There is something quietly touching in this, because even the strictest version of the evening's suspicion collapses under the weight of the world's ongoing generosity. The universe, whatever it is, keeps giving you things you could not have imagined on your own. New people, new sentences, new errors, new mornings that feel different from the last. So even if, in some deep sense, the argument for solipsism cannot be logically refuted, the texture of ordinary experience is constantly nudging against it. Reality shows up for you with too much detail, too much unpredictability, too much life of its own, to feel comfortably like a solo performance. And perhaps the wonder is not in choosing whether to accept or reject the solipsistic view. Perhaps the wonder is simply in noticing how, every day, the world quietly exceeds the boundaries of any story the self could tell alone. You are not alone, even in your most private moments. Something larger seems to keep arriving, uninvited and unauthored, through the edges of your experience. Now turn the dice differently, and let the thought drift into a softer shape. Suppose each of us, every conscious being, is in some deep sense the only one inside our own perspective, not alone in the cosmic sense, but uniquely at the center of a private world that only we ever fully inhabit. Each person, a complete universe to themselves. Each consciousness, a sealed and living sphere. On this view, when you meet another person, you are not meeting them directly. You are meeting the edges of their universe as they brush against the edges of yours. Two private worlds, touching at surfaces, exchanging signals, discovering that their surfaces match in places, never quite merging, never quite separate either. This is a gentler version of the old suspicion. It takes seriously the privacy of experience, the sealed nature of consciousness, the unreachability of another mind, but it turns the implication inside out. Instead of saying, "You are alone in existing," it says, "Each of us is alone in this particular way," which means none of us is alone in being alone. Every person you pass on a street is the center of their own universe, rich with memories, colors, sorrows, dreams, and quiet loves. Each is the protagonist of a story whose details you will never fully know. When you pass them, your universes overlap for a heartbeat, and then drift on. Some have found this thought oddly comforting, even though it begins in isolation, because it replaces the lonely image of one mind in an empty cosmos with something stranger and warmer. Countless sealed universes, each complete, each inhabited, each brushing against many others throughout the course of a life. Your partner, your parents, your children, your closest friend, the stranger who once spoke to you kindly on a day you have mostly forgotten. Each of them was the center of their own vast, private world, and in that world, You too appeared for a while as one of the bright edges. Turn that slowly in your mind. You have been inside other people's universes, many of them, usually without being told. A teacher who noticed you, a relative who remembered your laugh, someone you smiled at on a difficult day. In each of those minds, a small impression of you was built, and for a time you helped furnish their inner world, just as they have helped furnish yours. This picture does not require any fancy metaphysics. It flows naturally from the basic observation that every conscious being lives first inside their own experience. From that starting point, the shared world is a kind of overlap, the place where many private universes agree and can find each other, and strangely, this turns the loneliness of consciousness into a form of cosmic company. You are not the only one who is the only one. Billions of such centers are scattered across the surface of this planet tonight, each inhabiting its own complete reality, each sending gentle signals outward, each receiving a small handful of returns. No one of these universes can be proven to exist from the outside. Each must be taken on a kind of generous faith. But the faith is easy in the end, because their edges speak to each other so well. When someone's eyes meet yours and something passes between you without a single word, you know, in a way no philosopher can fully describe, that the universe on the other side of that glance is as real as your own, perhaps even more real than we usually imagine. There is a third way to turn the dice tonight, one that does not settle the matter but quietly enlarges it. What if reality is not produced inside a single mind, and not merely reflected between countless minds, but woven between them? A kind of collaboration, a cooperative structure that emerges where consciousness meets the world and where minds meet each other. This is not a new idea. Some strands of philosophy have hinted at it for centuries. Some interpretations of physics, particularly those that emphasize relations rather than isolated objects, point in a similar direction. Certain contemplative traditions have long suggested that reality, at its deepest level, is relational rather than substantial. The gentle version goes something like this. The world, as you experience it, is not entirely out there, independent of minds. It is also not entirely inside any one mind. It arises between your senses and the physical environment, between you and the person you are speaking with, between communities and the histories they remember together, between cultures and the meanings they build across generations. Think of a conversation. The meaning that passes between two people is not just in one speaker's head, nor only in the other's. It exists in the exchange. It is a thing that comes into being when two minds meet over a shared signal. Remove one of them, and the meaning collapses. The conversation cannot be fully captured by either side alone. Now scale this up. If reality is, in important ways, like a vast conversation between minds, between bodies, between systems, between information and the structures that interpret it, then the sharp distinction between inner and outer becomes less useful. Both are real, both are incomplete. Each needs the other to become the ordinary thing we usually call the world. Philosophers sometimes call this a relational view of reality. It is not a denial of the physical world. It is a softening of the assumption that the physical world is a complete, self-standing thing that exists fully without any perceiver. It suggests that the cosmos, as we encounter it, is partly a relationship we are in, rather than a backdrop we merely stand against. There is something soothing in this, though also humbling. Soothing because it places us inside the unfolding of reality rather than at its edges. You are not a lonely witness to a cold universe. You are a participant in the ongoing composition of what is. The warmth you feel for another is part of the fabric. The meaning you find in a quiet evening is part of the fabric. The wonder that rises as you think about any of this is, itself, part of what reality in its gentler interpretations is made of. Humbling because it means you cannot claim sole authorship. You are neither the creator of the world, nor merely its spectator. You are one of many voices in a shared composition that none of us can fully hear. The music emerges between us. No single thread holds all the notes. Tonight, you do not have to believe this view. You only have to let it offer its quiet possibility, that the separateness we feel and the togetherness we also feel are not in contradiction, that both are true in different dimensions of the same event, that reality may be a collaboration too gentle for any single mind to own, and that every evening, when you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, you are not leaving the collaboration, you are simply quieting one voice within it, while the larger chorus continues softly on. Here is an honest admission. After centuries of philosophy, decades of neuroscience, and all the advances of modern physics, the question at the heart of tonight's journey has not been resolved. It may never be. Whether you are the only thing that exists, whether other minds truly inhabit the bodies you see, whether the world you perceive corresponds, in any deep sense, to a world that is there, these questions sit in a strange place. They are not trivial, and they are not obviously silly. They can be explored with care, but they resist the kind of final proof we usually expect from rigorous thought. The reason is subtle. Any evidence you could gather, any argument you could make, any experiment you could run, all of it would take place within your experience. There is no vantage point outside your consciousness from which to check whether what is inside corresponds to something outside. The checker is always on the inside, and that means the deepest forms of skepticism about other minds and outer worlds cannot be refuted the way small errors can be refuted. This is sometimes called an underdetermined question. Multiple interpretations fit all the available evidence. The evidence, in principle, cannot pick between them. You can lean toward one. You can find one more reasonable, more elegant, more life-giving, but you cannot, in the strict sense, prove it. For some people, this is unbearable. They want answers. They want closure. They want a crisp stamp at the bottom of the page that says yes or no. But reality, on its deepest questions, does not seem to issue such stamps, and this is where something quietly important enters. Because if a question is genuinely unanswerable, not because we are lazy, but because of the very structure of being a mind-inside experience, then the pressure to answer it begins to ease, not because the question becomes small, but because you recognize the nature of your relationship to it. You stop waiting for a final verdict. You start living with it, as one lives with weather or with time. Some have called this a mature relationship with mystery. It is not belief. It is not disbelief. It is a patient, spacious way of carrying a question that cannot be closed. You allow it to stay open. You do not force a conclusion where no conclusion fits. You learn to appreciate the shape of the question itself and the strange gifts it gives: humility, curiosity, a gentler grip on your certainties. Many of the people who have thought most deeply about the nature of mind and reality have ended in something like this place, not proclaiming answers, not despairing of them, simply sitting with the open door. Tonight, as the hour deepens, you are invited to try this on, to notice that the question at the center of the evening, "Are you the only thing that exists?" does not have to be solved before you sleep. It does not have to be solved at all. It can be held gently, returned to now and then, softened by years, without ever reaching a verdict. You have lived your whole life with this question quietly unanswered. You have eaten meals, loved people, done work, laughed, cried, slept, woken. The question never stopped you. It was always there, at the edges, and still the ordinary goodness of life continued. Perhaps that is its own answer, not a logical answer, a lived one, a quiet agreement between you and the mystery that you will walk forward together through this night and many others without needing to finish the conversation. There is one last way to turn the thought, and this one is the softest. What if the unresolved quality of the question is not a defect in our knowledge, but a feature of what it means to be conscious at all? Consider, if everything about the mind could be fully explained from the outside, if we had a complete scientific description that left no residue, no remaining wonder, no open edges, then in some important way, we would have turned the mind into just another object, a mechanism, a thing describable by others. But minds are not merely objects to be described. They are the very place from which description happens. They are the inside of the universe is looking. It may be that a complete explanation, in the sense of closing all questions, is not something a mind can have about itself. To be a mind is, partly, to stand inside a mystery that cannot be finished from within. The mystery and the mind arise together. Some traditions have leaned into this directly. They have suggested that wonder is not a temporary state we occupy before we figure things out. Wonder is the signature of being alive and aware, the sense that reality exceeds any formula we use to describe it, the quiet recognition that whatever you understand, there is always more that remains unfolded. If this is true, and it may be, then the ancient question that has followed us through the night is doing more than asking for an answer. It is shaping a way of being. Every time you bring it into your awareness and let it remain unresolved, you are practicing a specific kind of attention, an openness, a willingness to hold something large without shrinking it to fit a small container. Science at its finest has this quality too. The great scientists rarely describe their work as the elimination of mystery. They describe it as deepening it. Each layer of understanding reveals a new horizon of questions. Each answer opens the door to another room. If mystery is not a problem to solve, but a home to live in, the entire flavor of the evening changes. The suspicion that you might be the only thing that exists is no longer a threat to be fought off or a puzzle to be cracked. It is one of many openings through which the world reveals that it is larger and stranger than our usual ways of thinking can hold. Not the only such opening, not the final one, but a real one, and a quietly beautiful one. Other openings appear all the time. The awareness of your own breathing, if you pause to attend to it, the astonishing fact that there is anything at all rather than nothing, the everyday miracle of meeting another person and feeling inexplicably that something true has passed between you. Each is its own small mystery, whispering that reality cannot be exhausted by any complete description. You do not need to solve any of them. You do not need to reach a verdict tonight, tomorrow, or in any year of your life. Some have said that wisdom is less about arriving at final answers and more about learning how to live peacefully inside questions that do not close. If that is true, then these long evenings of wondering, these quiet moments when the mind circles an old doubt without being able to settle it, are not wasted. They are gentle practice in the deepest art there is, the art of being at home in a universe that remains, at its heart, open. Slowly now. Let the cosmic scale soften. Let the long philosophies, the old thinkers, the quiet whispers of physics, all ease back toward the horizon. We have walked far tonight. We can begin to walk home. Notice, first, the small things, the weight of your body against the bed or chair, the rise and fall of your breath without any effort on your part, the temperature of the air against your skin, the tiny familiar sounds of wherever you are, the hum of something distant, the settling of a house into its nightly posture, the quiet pulse of your own listening. This too is part of what we have been discussing. This is the private universe we have been circling. It is not only the grand speculations about simulations, observers, and unanswerable questions. It is also this, the ordinary, immediate texture of being here, now, at this hour, inside this body, inside this room. Whatever turns out to be true at the deepest levels of reality, whether mind is fundamental or derived, whether the world is fully real or partly constructed, whether you are alone in your existence or sharing it with countless others, the softness of this moment remains. The breath continues, the warmth continues, the quiet settling into rest continues. We have spent the night unfastening a few of the certainties the day handed us. That work is worth doing sometimes. It makes the world feel larger, stranger, more alive. But the undoing of certainties is not itself a place to live. Eventually, the mind needs to come back to the room, to the pillow, to the sleepiness that is gathering at the edges of awareness. Perhaps the great gift of exploring these ideas is not that they replace ordinary life with something grander, but that they send you back into ordinary life with gentler eyes. The same room you were lying in before we began is the same room now. But perhaps it looks a little softer, a little more yours, a little more astonishing in the fact that it is here at all, and that you are here with it. There is no need tonight to carry any heavy conclusion. Not the burden of proving solipsism wrong, not the burden of accepting it, not the burden of answering what consciousness is, or how it fits into the cosmos. or whether anyone else is truly awake beside you. All of that can rest now. The thinking is done for the evening. The long walk through ideas has brought you back to where you began, but with a kinder relationship to the mystery that quietly surrounds every ordinary moment. Your room is real enough to hold you. Your breath is real enough to carry you. Your body is real enough to fall gently into sleep when the time comes. And whatever else may be true, these small and solid things are friends. They have been with you longer than any philosophy. They will be with you when the philosophies have faded for the night. Return to them. Feel them softly. Let them be the ground beneath you, even as the larger questions remain open far above. Strange as it sounds, there is a gift hidden inside the evening's doubt. You may already feel it beginning. When you have spent an hour or two considering the possibility that familiar things might be less solid than they seem, that faces, voices, memories, even the world itself, might be more mysterious than we usually allow, something subtle happens to ordinary life when you return to it. The automatic quality softens. The background comes into focus. The small taken-for-granted textures begin to glow a little. Because if any of these things might, in some sense, be a quiet miracle rather than a given, then each becomes a gift rather than a piece of furniture. The face of someone you love becomes not merely a face, but the remarkable emergence of a consciousness that was not obligated to exist. A conversation becomes not merely a conversation, but the meeting of two private universes across an impossible-seeming gap. An ordinary evening becomes not merely another evening, but a specific, unrepeatable moment in a cosmos whose existence no one has fully explained. You do not need to adopt any strange belief for this softening to occur. You only need to have spent some time entertaining the possibility that things might not be as automatic as they appear. The simple act of wondering loosens the grip of familiarity, and inside that loosened grip, the world often feels kinder, stranger, more precious. Many of those who have thought deeply about consciousness and reality have reported something similar. Not a loss of the world, a softening of it, a return to ordinary life, with a slightly renewed awareness of how improbable and luminous ordinary life actually is. This is perhaps the most useful thing philosophy and contemplation can give, apart from answers they cannot quite deliver. They can return us to our own lives with gentler eyes. They can remind us that the person across the table, the kitchen we wake to, the moment we are in right now, none of it is guaranteed. None of it was owed to us. All of it is, in some sense, a visit, and visitors deserve to be greeted. Not examined, not proven, not mastered. Greeted, welcomed, allowed to be what they are. Tonight, as the long ideas fade, you carry this small gift back with you. Whatever the deep truth of reality turns out to be, the ordinary world has become, quietly, a little more vivid, a little more yours, a little more worth returning to tomorrow. And that gentle vividness is already enough. It will be waiting for you in the morning, in the first light through the window, in the first sound of someone you know. The mind, after hours of circling questions without closing them, begins to settle into something new, a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of resolution, but the quiet of acceptance. Not the silence that comes after an answer, but the softer silence that comes when you stop needing one. This is worth recognizing, because so much of life is lived under a quiet insistence that we must know, we must be certain, we must decide, we must understand. The mind, trained by years of daily demands, rarely rests without at least a small wish for conclusion at the edge of its awareness. But tonight's journey has been about a question that cannot be concluded, and something curious happens when a mind fully accepts this. The constant reaching eases, the restless searching slows, a spaciousness begins to open, like a room whose ceiling has been quietly raised without anyone noticing. Not knowing, it turns out, does not have to be uncomfortable. It can become a place of rest when you allow it to. Many of the small anxieties that tighten our lives arise from fighting with unknowability. We try to foresee every outcome. We try to predict every reaction. We try to nail down the future, the past, the intentions of others, the meaning of our own experience. Some of this is necessary and useful, Much of it is a background hum of quiet resistance to the fact that life does not come with guarantees. Tonight, you have been practicing a different way of being with unknowability, a gentler way. You have sat hour by hour with a question that has no proof, and you have found that the question did not harm you. You did not need to resolve it. You did not need to push it away. You simply let it stay, and you stayed with it, and the night went on. This is a small skill, but a deep one, and it can be carried beyond the evening, in tomorrow's worries, in next week's uncertainties, in the long-running questions of your own life about work and love and meaning. The same softness becomes possible. Not avoidance, not resignation, simply the recognition that uncertainty is the natural climate of being a conscious creature, rather than a sign that something has gone wrong. When we stop treating not knowing as a failure, it becomes, instead, the background of being alive, the ground on which knowing appears briefly here and there like small islands. Most of the sea is not knowing, and the sea is not hostile. It is only the larger truth of how it is to be a mind in a universe that has always exceeded us. Rest in that sea tonight. The not knowing is safe. The open question is safe. The mystery that has walked with you through the hours is not a threat. It is a companion. And now, slowly, the evening lowers itself towards sleep. Your body is already softer than it was when we began. Your breathing has found its own quiet rhythm. The ideas we have visited are drifting like distant clouds, no longer requiring your attention, no longer needing to be held. They will be there tomorrow if you wish to return to them. They will be there the night after. They have waited for thinkers for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer. You do not need to carry any of them into sleep. Whether you are the only mind that exists, or one among countless others, or a participant in a reality that emerges between many, whichever turns out to be closest to the deepest truth, this moment of rest remains real enough to trust. The bed is there. The breath continues. The long, slow settling of the nervous system toward deeper waves has already begun, whether or not you noticed. The mind has done its work tonight. It has wondered. It has turned. It has asked questions it cannot answer, and sat with them patiently enough to soften. Now it is time for the mind to let go of its wondering and rest in the quiet background of simply being here, breathing, safe, warm. Notice, perhaps, how thoughts become slower, how they no longer hurry from one to the next, how the small pauses between them lengthen. This is the gentle approach of sleep, not an enemy, not a disappearance, but a natural return to the deeper layer beneath all the ideas. Whatever you are, in the deepest sense, you have been carried through this day, you will be carried through this night. The mystery does not stop loving you when you stop watching it. The world, however we are inside it, continues quietly on. Let the voice fade now into something softer than listening. Let the ideas blur into something warmer than thought. Let the long, slow evening complete itself in rest. You are here. That is already enough. You are here, and the room is quiet, and the night is gentle, and the mind may finally let itself drift. Sleep now, and know that whatever reality turns out to be, it has room for you. It has always had room for you, and it always will.